Do it once again. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In the words of Mikhail Bulgakov, there is no greater misfortune in the world than the loss of reason. Welcome, kittens, introducing the art of pose, where we take a deeper look inside the herstory of pose, fashion, music, dance, film, and culture. Mostly why we do things and where do they come from. So let's begin, kittens, with the herstory of pose.
I need everyone's attention. We have a challenge.
So, pose. What is it? Well, it's a verb. It's what you do. And it's what I do, in addition to bringing back the Powerpuff Girls and U.S. Department of Health Human Services early 2000s physical activity campaign for kids, because let's just say it's 2020 and more than ever necessary. So let's break it down. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines pose as a verb, to come to attention as, present, to put or to set in place, to assume a posture or an attitude, usually for artistic purposes, to affect an attitude or character, usually to deceive or impress. Next definition. A sustained posture, especially one assumed for artistic effect, an attitude, role, or characteristic assumed for effect. Next definition. Posing, posed, to puzzle, baffle. Of course, my favorite. So, who posed and why? Let's take a closer look at history's most iconic gestures and the stories behind this ancient body language. Dating back to my ancestors, the ancient Egyptians. They illustrated the body in composite pose, combining multiple perspectives in one single stance. So why? Profile is the easiest to draw people. And composite pose symbolically portrays eternal stillness. But these contortions also had spiritual implications. The ancient Egyptians believed that souls needed earthly homes, such as sculpted sarcophagi or painted portraits, to survive after death. Designed to convey the sense of eternal life, the composite pose presents figures as unwavering, motionless, and altogether timelessness. On the contrary, while Egyptians glorified eternal stillness, the Greeks came in to shake things up, portraying the human form in contrapose or contrapposto, capturing the body in movement or in step. Body weight is emphasized to one side while the other leg is bent at the knee. This activates the muscle, giving this more realistic body a lively, dynamic twist. Practically breathing, more like bursting, which makes sense. The Greeks really were one of the first ones to document and love to show off their muscles. But they really love this sense of effortless naturalism, and it's definitely one of the most desired styles of pose today. Next pose.
The old way! The only way!
Aduticio. Also known as orator or commanding pose, raising your right arm and index or pointer finger, which has been historically known to be taken advantage of by leaders, especially when addressing troops during battle. Example is Augustus, and even though the style formed in 1st century AD, it has inspired many artists to follow time and time again. The ancient Roman sculptures, Augustus of Prematura in 1st century AD, remains the most famous example of Aduticio, when the neoclassical master Jacques-Louis David painted Napoleon At the Great Saint Bernard in 1801, he lifted the French leader's right arm to echo that of iconic Augustus. Gilbert Stuart did the same when capturing George Washington in 1796, and most depictions of Chairman Mao feature this gesture as well, but fuck George Washington. So you may be wondering, why are we so obsessed with our right arm over our left? I was. In Western art traditions, the right side of the body has been symbolically linked to righteousness and divinity. And, you know, goddess's right-hand lady, or the right hand is goddess's favored hand. But truly, Western Christianity, Jesus sat at God's right side, and during the Last Judgment, for example, in the painting of the Last Judgment, it featured the blessed rising to the heaven on Christ's right side, while the damned fell to the left. In early marriage, portraits men stood to the right of their wives to signal their elevated status in union, and accordingly, the raised right arm of Augustus, Napoleon, Washington, Mao linked their power to the heavens and pay homage to the great leaders of their past. Additionally, in Eastern art and culture, the right hand also symbolizes purity. Moving on to the first iconic and monumental sculpture of a naked woman in Western art history, Praxiteles, Aphrodite of Knidos in 14th century BC. Men, on the other hand, had already been portrayed unclothed for over 300 years. So, yeah, up until this point. For this pioneering subject matter, Praxiteles needed to invent a new pose, along with the narrative to justify his figure's unprecedented nudity. Standing in contrapposto, Praxiteles, Aphrodite, noticed a stranger intruding in her bath. In the original, the goddess recoils, covering her pubis with one hand and grabbing her garment with the other. This pudica, or modest pose, quickly became standard iconography for women in art, and is heralded for its eroticism. By covering themselves, women in pudica pose have tantalized viewers, drawing attention to their sexuality. And while the posture has been adopted by countless artists, including Botticelli, Rembrandt, and Pablo Picasso, it's easy to forget the troubling nature at its core, the gesture of a woman protecting her body from unwanted advances. A narrative we are still currently dealing with today, sadly. Justice for Jane. Next pose, Serpentine. Just kidding. It was winter, 1506, and Michelangelo discovered the Hellenistic Greek masterpiece, Laocoon and His Sons, which is dated back to 4030 BC. And he was enamored by the sculpted figures. He studied and sketched them repeatedly. The style of sculpture was miraculous at the time, and apparently was filled with dramatic contortions unseen by Western eyes. Literally each limb is facing in an opposite direction. The entire body is spiraled on its axis. Serpentine poses are arresting, sensuous, and almost always natural. Few would twist their body in opposite directions by choice, but this exaggerated tension appealed to Mannerist and Baroque artists like Angelo Bronzino and Gian Lorenzo Barini, respectively, who wanted to imbue these images with movement rather than naturalism. For many, Laocoon had cast a shadow over the standard contrapposto, showing that bodies could express more than emotional drama than the effect of a single step. Next pose. Odalisque. Another art convention emerged, again, transpiring history, just 4 years after Michelangelo's discovery of Laocoon. And in 1510, Renaissance painter Giorgione painted our first ever seen female nude in recline. Odalisque, Sleeping Venus, covers her sex with one hand while sleeping at some drapery in a picturesque landscape. The erotic display, designed to please male viewers, was only admissible because it featured a goddess rather than a real woman. During the 18th century, colonial expansion exposed artists to Eastern cultures, and many painters became fixated on the subject of the Ottoman harem. Instead of depicting Venus, artists like Jean-Auguste Dominique Inge and Eugène Delacroix began to paint the odalisque, or harem chambermaid, in a similarly suggestive reclining pose. Though she wasn't a goddess, odalisque was still considered other, enough to sexualize the figure without reproach. Then we have Olympia. Monet became the first artist to place a modern white woman in this pose and surprisingly shocked audiences. Olympia doesn't lie passively with her eyes closed, but rather looks directly at her viewers, confronting their gaze. And though the painting was revolutionary, Olympia also added to the long list of artworks by male artists featuring nude women in this pose. And in 1989, the Guerrilla Girls famously drew attention to this trend by creating a poster of an odalisque with a provocation: do women have to get naked to get into the Met Museum? And we're jumping ahead, but the answer to that is yes. But just kidding. Well, it sure feels that way. I had to get naked to get into museums, but anyway. Next pose.
Do it once again. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.